creates questions the human mind cannot answer. Out of reach, past all we can see, hear, and touch, beyond all we understand, lies the extraordinary.
A male close to you passed over? Yeah.
The extraordinary is the belief by thousands that this simple suburban man can contact the dead. We tested him with people he'd never met and heard messages from the departed he could not have known.
Obviously he is shot.
Yes.
Okay. I see him behind you. A uniform involved with his work?
Yes.
Because I feel him in uniform behind you. I would assume he had to be a policeman, yes?
Yes.
It is the profound sensual experience of actress Jacqueline Bisset, the day she dusted off an old book in a Paris bookstore.
As I read this book, I was going through many moments of feeling, of thinking, oh Lord, my God, this is so good. Oh, this helps me. It's like eating the best meal ever.
The extraordinary is the 1 in a million chance that brought a young thief undone. An impossible twist of fate.
To me, that was quite ironic that it all seemed to fall into place and the good guys won, which was great.
The extraordinary is the night this man says he was taken on a mystery voyage by aliens. A journey academics are taking seriously.
The chap in question is definitely sincere and seems convinced that what he experienced actually happened.
Just some of the stories that lie beyond our normal understanding. Tonight on The Extraordinary.
The story of one man's encounter with the unknown is one not to be missed. Good evening, I'm Warwick Moss. Welcome to this premiere episode of the new season of The Extraordinary. Tonight we have a special two-part story of a unique man who has for many fundamentally changed the definition of life and death. His name is George Anderson. No matter what your personal beliefs about the hereafter, you may want to reserve your judgment on Anderson until you've seen the whole story. Death. It is the first and final question that consumes all of us almost from the day we are born. From the beginning of time, man has tried to answer it with real or imagined gods, rituals of resurrection, hope in the hereafter. For only in death do we entrust an answer to the meaning of life. Until it comes to each of us individually, we grasp for clues, especially during times of grief over the death of loved ones. Are they really gone? Is their spirit somewhere out there still? Many search through prayer, some through mystics, mediums, or perceived messages in dreams. Between the living and the dead, there is the everlasting search for contact. And then there is this man, George Anderson.
She just wants to let everybody know that she's all right and at peace. Please tell me you heard from Mom, you heard from Helen. You worry too much, she says. And when the water's calm, you're afraid where's the shark?
As he scribbles randomly on a notepad, he talks to the dead. Thousands throughout the world believe he is the link, the one who for the first time in the quest of the living has achieved contact with the departed.
That's correct. Okay.
If it is true, then the powers that decide such things have made an unlikely choice. In all other matters, Anderson is exceptional only in the ordinariness of his life. He is a meticulous man who does his own laundry, lives in a suburban house in middle-class America, and is fastidious about such things as paying his mortgage on time. Nevertheless, there is a 2-year waiting list of the living desperate to attend a session in which George might contact their dead. The phenomenon that creates such obsession is there in titles of books written about his work. We Don't Die, We Are Not Forgotten, Our Children Forever. The author of these books, Joel Martin, was once extremely doubtful. He's now convinced.
When you rule out all of the other possibilities of what it might be, you are left with only one possibility. For lack of anything else, you have got to conclude that what George is doing is receiving messages somehow from the souls of the departed.
Martin's belief is a total reversal. He hosted a radio program that debunked frauds, psychics and mediums. But when Martin attended his first session with George, it changed him forever.
In 1979, my former wife was killed. Hit by a car and killed crossing a street in New York City.
You've lost a wife recently.
He described what she looked like.
Yes, she was very young. And I'm sensing metal, some sort of concussion, possibly a car accident.
He knew where the injury was, something I did not know. And then when he went like this,
She's pointing her finger at you.
I got very, very upset. I grabbed onto
She
her.
continues to go back and forth with her finger. I can't make out exactly what she's doing. I think she might be scolding you or
She'd
something.
go like this, always go like this. And I'm saying to myself, my God, how could he possibly know that mannerism? It is not something I would ever have told anybody. It's not something he could really have researched. It was a very private thing that only 2 people in the world could know, me or her. Now, as far as I know, she's dead.
We set up our own tests of Anderson's supposed ability, all recorded on tape. This policeman's widow lost her husband in a gunfight and 3 years later suffered the double tragedy of her 5-year-old son's death under the wheels of a car. George Anderson was told nothing about the woman but her first name. He had no way of knowing about her 2 tragedies. Listen to his first words.
Slowly but surely. A male close to you passed over?
Yes.
2? One
Yes.
younger, one older?
Yes.
It's 2 different generations.
We will see more of that session later. But first, a few facts about George and the lengths he has gone to test the validity of his claims. EEG and thermography tests indicate that his brain waves exhibit a sleeping state, and his body temperature is elevated while he is in session or contact. George seems genuinely open-minded and curious about his own ability.
I'm still very cynical about it. Not that I don't believe in what I'm doing, but I'm still looking for proof too. We were brought up not to believe this. We were brought up, these things don't happen, these things don't exist. We're taught in religion as such to believe in a life hereafter, believe in this, believe in that, but we really do not see anything. Miracles don't happen as they did in the Bible or centuries ago. Something is happening, most definitely. Something is happening. It's no joke, it's not a fake. Something really is happening. And I'm just as curious as anybody else to find out how it is or how it works. If you can prove to me, beyond a question of a doubt, that it is a unique type of mental telepathy, that it's not what I think it is, you're not going to break my heart. As I've said before, and I'll say it again, if it weren't for this ability, I basically would be an atheist.
At 6, George developed chickenpox with a massive fever and came close to death. When he recovered, he says he was left with what he calls the affliction of seeing the future. Affliction because his premonitions of death caused not only resentment, but during his teens, the threat of being institutionalized. Today, thousands try to get through on his appointment line, and sessions are booked only under first names. At the reading, George instructs them to volunteer no information about themselves or the departed.
Whatever I say to you as we begin, please just say yes or no. And let's see.
Martin says George's accuracy is near 90%, and that even his apparent mistakes aren't quite the failures they seem.
What happens is that George has got to interpret symbols. George has got to interpret sensations and then logically translate them. George may feel a pain in the chest. A pain in the chest could be a heart attack. A pain in the chest could be pneumonia. A pain in the chest could be somebody shot in the chest, stabbed in the chest, some kind of projectile through the chest.
Martin's acceptance of Anderson's amazing abilities led to his books about people whose lives changed after George's reading. One that stays with him is the case of a heartbroken father who lost his little girl to cerebral palsy.
This man had one secret wish, that his little girl could put her arms around him and say, "Daddy, I love you," sit on his lap and do the things that we would expect our little children to do. But she obviously couldn't because she was too profoundly retarded and didn't have the motor coordination. She was in a wheelchair. Before he went to George, he was in his hotel room and he said, "Oh, honey, if you're there, please just tell me, just say, 'Daddy, I love you,' put your arms around me, tell me you give me a kiss," something along those lines.
I'm seeing wheels, like a bicycle. It's a wheelchair. She was in a wheelchair. Your daughter was in a wheelchair.
George goes through the whole reading, and there's tremendous amount of accurate details. And the reading is about to end, and George is concluding. And he says, "Oh, one more thing," George says to the anonymous subject, to this man. "Your little girl is saying, she's on your lap, 'I love you, Daddy.'"
Daddy, I love you. And she wants to tell you, Daddy, that she's now hugging you, and she wants to give you a kiss. She wants to let you know that she's giving you a kiss now. Yes.
He says it seems very ordinary, but that's extraordinary. And then she handed him back a
Teddy bear. Yes, she's giving you back a teddy bear.
That was her favorite toy, and when we buried her, there wasn't enough room in the casket.
In a moment, the Extraordinary will conduct its own test of George Anderson. We have seen and heard thousands of testimonials from people who believe George Anderson has made contact with their departed loved ones. We met many others who were desperate to try. It is a vulnerable period for those of us left to mourn. It opens us to charlatans and trickery. With no motive other than to explore the truth of his ability, we set up a series of sessions at his home on Long Island, New York. These four women have come a long way to meet George Anderson. One has waited a year. The other three have travelled across the United States, all burdened with tragedy and burning with the question, could this be the culmination of unbearable grief, or is it all for nothing? Otherwise, they are each normal, sensible women. This is Linda. She mourns the loss of her mother, Helen.
Oh, we were very close. You know, very close, like sisters.
These two are mother and daughter, Norma and Susan. They lost their loving husband and father, Tom, to a gunman's bullet.
I kept, you know, thinking, I'm going to wake up and just, this is going to be all behind me.
In startling encounters with Anderson, they would weep and express dramatic and profound reactions to his words. Their sessions will be the subject of future stories. But our first session tonight is with Andrea Pratt. She lost her husband, Dan, to violent death, and just 3 years later, her darling son, Nick. We flew her in from California. Anderson has not met her before this moment. The session we are about to witness is as it happened. Any editing is for time purposes only. Anderson has been told nothing. She is a policeman's widow. Her husband, Dan, shot dead on the job 5 years ago. And then, even as she was still in mourning, her 5-year-old son, Nick, was killed in a freak car accident. Andrea admits life's tortures have left her drained. And of the 4 women, she has come to Anderson with the least expectation, though in search of the same finality to her grief. Andrea and Dan had been high school sweethearts. He was just 30 and an LA cop. She was pregnant with their 4th child when a bullet killed their dreams. There was a knock on the door at midnight, September the 3rd, 1988. The knock every police wife dreads.
I opened the door, but my brother was standing at the front door. My brother's also a LAPD officer. My brother didn't even have to tell me, I knew. I just said, how bad is it? And my brother started crying. And so then I asked him, I said, did he have his vest on? And he said, yes, he was hit in the head.
Dan was shot in the face at point-blank range. And then, almost 2 years ago, Andrea lost their beloved little boy, Nick.
The kids had wanted to walk to school with their other friends. Amanda and Danny had walked home every day since school started, but Nicholas was in kindergarten, so I picked him up every day. So this was the 3rd day they'd walked to school by themselves. They were with 2 other children. And the bell rang for them to go into class, and at that point, Nicholas was the first in the pack to head across the parking lot when a lady in a van apparently just didn't see him. And she struck him. She was going approximately 15 miles an hour. And he fell to his knees, and she stopped because she heard people yelling, and she heard someone screaming, "Mommy." Well, that was Nicholas screaming for me, but she thought it was her son. So she was looking at her son, and then she went forward, and when she went forward, she killed him instantly. I can literally sit in the living room and visualize him in the backyard playing with the dogs, or hear him laughing after a year and a half. He was very much a daddy's boy. Both my boys were. And even after my husband died, Nick was 2.5, and he cried for his dad all the way up till he died. He always wanted his dad around.
Again, listen to Anderson's first words.
A male close to you passed over?
Yes.
2?
Yes.
One younger, one older?
Yes.
There is violence in the passing?
Yes.
Because there's bloodshed in front of you. So there's obviously violence in the passing and great tragedy. There is a weapon in his passing?
Yes.
Yeah, because Again, though, it affects him more internally?
Yes.
Why does he tell me there's a weapon involved, and yet, I mean, don't say anything, but why is he saying there's a weapon involved, and yet it affects him internally? It seems to make a contradiction in my mind, but in essence, he's basically at the wrong place at the wrong time.
Yes.
'Cause I hear gunshots, and I'm just trying to
Yes.
make sure that before I open my big mouth that this is what he's trying to tell me, because they can be symbols of weapons. Obviously, he is shot.
Yes.
Okay. Shot to the head?
Yes.
Because it feels like one clean shot to the head.
Yes.
Puts a big heart in front of you. Were you and he romantically involved? Or is that just...
Yes.
You are. Okay, because that can also be a symbol of great fondness.
No.
So I'm trying to figure out what does he want me to say by this, so I assume... You're married? Emotionally?
No, I was married.
You're married to him at the time of passing?
Yes.
Yeah, because he says we're married, we're husband and wife. That's why you said was married to him. He says, what do you mean was? Is. You seem to react to that in any case. He working when he passes?
Yes.
He's talking about being killed on the job.
Yes.
So he must have been working at the time of passing. He's caught by surprise, though, yes?
Yes.
Because this is not... It's almost as if he's responding to a routine call or something.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden, bingo, he's caught by surprise. I see him behind you. A uniform involved with his work?
Yes.
Because I feel him in uniform behind you. I would assume he had to be a policeman, yes?
Yes.
Suddenly, Anderson picks up the name of Andrea's grandfather.
Somebody around you claiming to be father. I'll have to go with grandfather. Name William, you know?
Yes.
And then, husband Dan's.
Also name Harry doesn't mean you know, does it?
Yes.
Is that the other granddad?
It's his granddad.
There's also another young male close to you passed on?
Yes.
Other than your husband? There's talk of a son. Did you lose a son?
Yes.
Oh. A vehicle involved in his passing?
Yes.
Because he keeps telling me a car accident, but not the way I'm going to think, but a vehicle's involved.
Yes.
There's a hit. He hit?
Yes.
Also injury to the head, too?
Yes.
Yeah, because it's definitely a strike to the head or from the hit or whatever, and it seems just kills him instantly. Unfortunately, this is a careless accident.
Yes.
Because that's, your son doesn't blame anyone. He embraces you with love along with your husband. Just know that the two of them are together, along with your grandparents, the other relatives, of course, that have passed on. And they ask you to continue to go on with your life as best you can until we're all together again, until we meet again, which will happen. As much as sometimes you might want it to be tomorrow, you have to go on to get through this one.
Nick, who loves you?
God loves me.
Who else?
Jesus.
All right.
Was there contact with the dead this day? Neither Andrea nor we can be sure. Since that session some weeks ago, we have stayed in contact with Andrea Pratt, and she remains convinced of one fact. Whether or not contact was made with the departed, her life has fundamentally changed since she met George Anderson. Since hearing that her son does not blame anyone for his death, Andrea says she too has learned to forgive. We'll be bringing other sessions with Anderson in coming weeks. I recommend you don't miss them. More in a moment.
Coming up, the Perth man who says he has been visited by aliens.
I feel a lot of fear. I fear the fact that I don't know what I'm dealing with here.
A claim that academics are treating with respect. The glowing light from an old book that enveloped actress Jacqueline Bisset. An experience, she says, that changed her life.
If someone had told me about this before that period, I would have thought they were a bit odd. Maybe I'm a bit odd, but it certainly happened to me.
A freak coincidence that brought a crime undone.
The person himself, fortunately, was not armed, and it worked out okay. It was a good one, a winner.
People who face the unknown or the unexplained often find themselves marooned on an island of isolation after their experience. Confused, bewildered and frightened, many find there is nowhere to turn, no one to talk to, for fear of being ridiculed or mocked. Take, for instance, the case of a man we are going to call Andrew. He's a real person, but he doesn't want his real name used for a very good reason. You see, Andrew says he's been under the control of aliens, moved about by their strange forces. Believe it or not, some respected academics say that's quite possible.
It was on the 4th of February 1992. That evening was something which I will never forget. I was very restless. In fact, I couldn't get to sleep. Consequently, from there on in, I must have dozed off. But what happened from there on in, I really don't know how it happened, but it happened.
According to Andrew, what happened was this. Suddenly, he was awake. Somehow, he had been transported and was standing in this car park outside a basketball stadium. A stadium that's located 50 kilometres from his home on the outskirts of Perth. He had no idea how he got there, but he did know he was not alone. He was surrounded by more than 30 strangers.
I turned to this person alongside me and I said, "Where am I? What am I doing here?" This person looked at me and without using the spoken word, just said virtually through my mind, "You're lucky to be chosen." And this blue light appeared from such a small dot and got larger and larger until finally it intensified to such magnetism that it was virtually over the top of us, and a brilliant white flash is all I recall. The very next thing was I was inside this basketball hall.
Andrew's confusion turned to fear. Again, he was not alone, but now there was something sinister about his companions.
They took on a human-like figure. The thing that distinguished them most of all, that were different from humans, were their eyes. Their eyes were, to me, they resembled as if they were out of focus.
My first impressions, formed over several hours, were that the chap in question is definitely sincere and seems convinced that what he experienced actually happened.
Professor John Frodsham from Murdoch University in Perth is president of the Australian Society of Psychical Research. He's investigated many cases of this kind and has conducted lengthy interviews with Andrew and his family.
I must say that I hadn't encountered anything quite like this before, because although abduction cases now are becoming 10 a penny or a dime a dozen, there are very few of them in which the abductee is transported, as our case alleged he was transported, from one locality to another.
But Andrew says this was not his first encounter, nor was it to be his last.
When I was 7 years old, they had been to see me before and they had given this gift to me.
The gift was a cricket bat, and memories of that childhood experience flooded back to him 34 years later as he stood in the basketball stadium.
The whole place was abuzz. The lights were on, everything was happening. And I noticed people were receiving gifts from these things. One of them came over to me and offered me a gift. I looked at it and I thought to myself there and then, what is this? As I looked down towards what I was given, it was a cricket bat.
Was it a reminder of the previous visit? Andrew says he doesn't know because of what happened next.
There was one of these things kneeled down, accepting my emotions, my feelings, everything that I was feeling. It was accepting and drawing in, as if it was robbing me, depriving me of my own thoughts. I felt aggravated, I felt violated, I became very angry. And consequently, I dropped the gift that I was given. I looked over towards the others and I said, "This is not what it seems. Get out of here." I got to the exit doors within the hall and everything just went brilliant white. The next thing I remember, I was back on my bed to where I must have dozed off asleep, and the first thing that I remembered was waking up and seeing the time. It was 2:15 a.m.
But Andrew's story doesn't end there. Exactly a month later, at 2:30 a.m. on March the 4th, 1992, he was jolted out of his sleep by an intense blue light. Through the glare, he saw someone or something.
It was definitely a figure. It stood approximately 4 foot, maybe 4'6" high, no taller. What was incredible was the fact that my son was being guided down the passageway by this thing. It was at this point that I noticed that my body was paralyzed. My mind was completely functional, but my body wouldn't respond. It was only when this blue misty-like figure had disappeared from my sight did I gain the strength enough to be able to get off the bed and go and grab my son.
Andrew says that's when the figure vanished in a flash of white light. The next thing he remembers is finding his 10-year-old son tucked up in bed, safe but very pale and shaken. The boy was well enough to go to school next morning, but not long after, there was another mysterious problem.
We were sitting down eating a lamb roast, and consequently, what had happened was we'd just all finished our dinner, and my son had an irritation at the back of his throat.
And this is what he coughed up when he cleared his throat. Andrew's theory is that the tiny metal object could have been implanted in the boy by the strange nocturnal visitor on March the 4th.
If it should turn out to be made of an unusual metal, an unusual alloy, that's to say an alloy which is not encountered here on Earth, then of course we have a very strong lead indeed.
Well, we've since had the object tested by experts at Curtin University in Perth. These are photographs of it taken under a powerful spectrograph. And the university's verdict? The object is most likely a computer component manufactured in Sweden. That verdict aside, Andrew stands by his story and adds one final twist. He says his 2 children sighted unidentified flying objects hovering near their house back in March 1992. And he's worried that for his family, the story is far from over.
I feel a lot of fear. I fear the fact that I don't know what I'm dealing with here. I feel they're coming back. They are coming back. They told me they'd be back in 5 of our Earth years. 5 years was the time at which they'll come back and they'll see my son again. Against my wishes, there is nothing I can do. I feel completely helpless. There's no one I can turn to, there's no one I can trust.
Was it all a dream? Could have been. But Andrew is convinced it wasn't. It describes it as one of the most profound, sensual, and spiritual experiences of her life. It came from an old book called The Mirror of Light, a book she dusted off in a very old bookstore in Paris more than a decade ago. From the old book came a glowing light that enveloped her and changed her life for 3 months. The story of the book is one that Jacqueline has only ever told to personal friends. She is a very private woman, and her thoughts of the spiritual are known only to an intimate few. Perhaps it was the dark and rainy day, the afternoon we called at her Beverly Hills home a couple of weeks ago, that created the mood for her to confide some of those thoughts. The world knows Jackie as the classic dark-haired beauty of such movies as The Deep, Under the Volcano, Rich and Famous, Class, or the 1990 erotic thriller Wild Orchid. But behind the walls of her secluded estate, buried deep in a leafy nook of the canyons, Jacqueline talked to us about her other side.
As an actress, I'm certainly more fortunate than many to be able to be who I am and to move through experiences and, you know, pick and choose a bit. There's a whole irreverent side of me that just hasn't had a chance to get out. I sometimes frequently find myself in situations that I've lived before. I've dreamt before or lived before. And I go, oh, there's one of those. Ooh. So actually somebody once told me, you were a sailor and you drowned underwater and you have great fear of water. I said, well, absolutely I do. And I was, of course, immediately totally fascinated. And actually it was just 2 years before I did The Deep, which was one of the more fearful experiences I had to go through. And I got through it and thought, well, this is the reason I'm frightened of water, is because I don't know if I believe any of it. When I feel my mind heading off into that area of discontent, I tried to remind myself, this is my life at this moment. This is it. It won't be there tomorrow. It'll be a different one. This is the moment.
And then, during the course of this dark afternoon, Jacqueline told us her most personal story, the story of the old book.
I was in Paris with a friend who was rather knowledgeable about spiritual matters. And we were wandering around and we went into an old bookstore, which is called the Old Shakespeare Company bookstore near Notre Dame. It's a very, very old bookstore. Many, many histories behind it. And he turned me on to this book. He said, read this little book. It was called The Mirror of Light by Rodney Collins. The book had been heavily underlined, and obviously some students or some people had read this book and gone through a similar thing to what I'd gone through. I've never felt a book with such vibrations in it. But as I read this book, I was going through many moments of feeling, of thinking, oh Lord, oh my God, this is so good. Oh, this helps me. It's like eating the best meal ever. You know, just feeding you. Books can do that. I mean, they can feed you just like the greatest conversation or the greatest physical, sensual experience. And I had something like I don't know what it was, something, a light thing, something went up from me. I saw something like, I don't know what it was. I saw light moving up, going up and up and up and up and up. The light was not around me, it was at a certain distance from me, and it was a feeling of something. I can't even say what was in the center of this light. I don't know. It was a feeling coming up, and it went up, the light went up, and it looked a bit like a cloud, an illuminated cloud mass, in a pillar kind of feeling, and went up. And I was illuminated for my spiritual life was illuminated for about 3 months. I found myself talking about things that didn't particularly, before I found myself talking about religion, which was not a subject I was particularly pro. I found myself inspired by something other than anything I've ever been through in my life. And I was awfully surprised by it, rather embarrassed by it, didn't know what to do with this sense of energy and clarity. And I never discussed it with anybody. But the feeling, the effect of this thing lasted about 3 months. If someone had told me about this before that period, I would have thought they were a bit odd. Maybe I'm a bit odd, but it certainly happened to me.
If you've ever been tempted to do something you shouldn't, like telling a little white lie, making up a story to suit your own purposes, or even taking something that wasn't yours, you'll know the sense of guilt that overwhelms just at that vital moment. For most, it makes us do the right thing, but for others, it has no effect. They seem to be able to dismiss the consequences of their illegal acts, but sometimes fate steps in to prove that doing the wrong thing just doesn't pay off. This story is about a crime that just wasn't meant to be. (1975) and the Australian Junior 10-pin bowling titles in Melbourne. Competition was fierce, but a team from Morwell in southeast Victoria managed to bowl over all the opposition and take out first prize. The cheques were duly written and posted out to Morwell's triumphant team. One of them for $103 to young bank teller Kathy Raymond. But weeks after the competition,
everybody in Morwell had their cheques, and here I am still waiting for mine, getting pretty nervous as to where it is.
What Kathy didn't know then was the cheque had been delivered, but a brazen thief had beaten her to the mailbox. He must have thought it was his lucky day, but that luck started to run out the moment he walked into the Morwell branch of the Commonwealth Bank.
I want to cash this cheque from your sister.
For a start, a police patrolman, Sergeant Max Wilton, just happened to be in the same bank at the same time.
I had momentarily glanced around the bank. It's a routine that I think any serving officer gets into. You just have a look around and see what's going on. And of course the bank people like to see that, and they like to see uniforms. I didn't pick that there was anything out of place.
The thief didn't either, but an alert teller did. By now the thief's luck was well and truly down the drain. You see, out of all the banks in the area, he'd chosen the very branch where Kathy Raymond worked. And her colleague had spotted Kathy's name on the cheque.
I got nervous, I suppose, at suddenly seeing my cheque there that had been missing for a couple of weeks. I thought, you know, this is mine, what's he doing with it?
That's exactly what the bank's accountant wanted to know too.
Excuse me, can I see you for a moment, please?
When the chap called me over, I thought he was going to ask me some routine question that everyone asks a policeman. And he presented this cheque to me and told me what was happening, the drama that was unfolding further down the teller's aisle. And of course that I was taken quite by surprise.
Nevertheless, Sergeant Wilton went into action.
We effected an arrest without disturbing the bank, and the person himself, fortunately, was not armed, and it worked out okay. It was a good one, a winner.
Well, the law certainly won, and so did Kathy Raymond. She eventually got a new cheque, her share of the prize money. But for the thief, this was one crime that was never going to pay. The cheque he tried to cash had already been cancelled.
The irony of the whole thing is that he was cashing a useless cheque. He would have got no money for it.
So it really was a case of a born loser with all the odds stacked against him.
On that day, I could have chosen any great number of banks in any great number of towns and to be there at that precise time. So to me that was quite ironic that it all seemed to fall into place, and the good guys won, which was great.
Between bliss and catastrophe, a flicker in the course of fate can overwhelm us with riches or take from us all that we possess. This family locked itself away from brutal winter cold, only to find that its youngest member was lost in the deadly snow.
I'm thinking, oh, please, God, it's, you know, Christmas Eve, and, you know, this child is dead, and there's no worse way to spend a Christmas thinking about that, because that's a lot of what Christmas is all about, is children.
What followed was nothing short of a miracle. An untold story. Next week.
What happened that cold winter's night has to be seen to be believed. It may help convince you miracles do happen. By the way, we're following up a number of stories you told us about at the end of our last series. In coming weeks, we'll be bringing you some of them. If you've got a story you'd like us to take a look at, write to Post Office Box 462, Newport Beach, New South Wales, 2106. Now, before we go tonight, another story from next week. It's about a woman who had a premonition so vivid, so clear, so frightening, she just had to tell someone about it. And the man she told became witness to a prediction of disaster, a prediction that came tragically true. Good night. See you in the future.
I wish I knew how anybody could guess something so accurately in advance. It is very disturbing to think that it's possible to tap into future events.